Hi everyone. So as you probably saw in the email, we had some technical difficulties in our last Framer exercise. So I've opted to re-record portions of that class to make it a little more concise, a little easier to follow, and I wanted to include a little more detail around some of the elements that we're working with. This is going to be a lot easier to watch, I hope, because we're not going to have the while welcome class interruptions with questions. We'll be able to just run through the way it works, and you can rewind and take a look at things anytime you need to check in, follow up, whatever. We're going to run through how some templated elements work as well, but for the most part, a lot of the information that I'm going to be running through actually comes from an official Framer Make a Website in Minutes video that you can review. Now that video won't give you a lot of detail on why certain things work certain ways or why we're doing certain things, but it will give you the sort of blitz version of getting right through the end. So that video's just under 20 minutes long. It includes a couple of things that I won't be covering in this video as well, but really, our goal is to get you moving in Framer and start being able to put things together so that you can start building your portfolio site. None of the class stuff that we do for the portfolio side is going to be a beginning to end. Here's exactly how to make your portfolio. And part of the reason is because everyone's using a different platform. People have different work they want to showcase, and everyone's unique personality, unique learning style, and unique working style means that we have to make 15, 20 classes on each single thing that every single person might want to do. It's just not something we can do this late in the year. So we're going to take it sort of one step at a time in Framer, and if anyone has any questions or concerns about any other platform they're working in, they're welcome to bring them to class, and we'll talk about it, and we'll figure out ways to make your portfolio the best it can be before you go out into the world. So, all that said, let's jump in. Okay, let's talk about Framer. So, here's your project dashboard. You can see here, this is your recent section where all of your projects and soon just your portfolio project will live. And above here, we have the Get Started section. And I want you to pay specific attention to this. The Get Started section links up here to a learning page, which gives you access to all kinds of learning resources about Framer. So if you're running into specific problems that we didn't cover in this video or in class or otherwise, this is great. So there's a 3-hour free course you can click on here and you can take a look at. This gives you access to all kinds of advanced features like 3D animation that we aren't going to be running through in here. It gives you different information on things like layout sizing, breakpoints, making more responsive top bars. It really dives into details on a lot of these topics. So if you have questions about the way that certain parts of Framer work, I would highly recommend you take a stroll through this page. Very cool and useful that they provide something like this. Now, we'll take a look here and we'll just do a little tour around our project page. Over on the left-hand side, you can see we have our recent, we have archived work, we have a section that's just called All. That All section is kind of where we are now. This gives you all of your recent projects, things like that. Templates, which we don't have any of, and archived things, which is like basically Framer's way of deleting your elements. Nothing ever goes away, it just goes into the archive. So without further ado, let's jump in and take a look at Framer. We're going to click New Project. And when we do, it will create a beautiful just desktop frame for our page. If we zoom out, you'll see we just work with the desktop first, and we'll break things out into a responsive style later, including tablet and mobile breakpoints. Now, taking a look at the basics, what we have available to us before we click anything, before we touch anything. At the top here, the top left, Framer has a sort of toolbar that should be somewhat familiar, maybe not in contents, but in style with other programs you've used. File gives you access to things like new from template. You can copy links, you can view version histories, publish your site, upload images, and there's more here. Just go back to here and you can see new pages, new canvas pages, import from Sketch or Figma, invite people to collaborate, etc. You get edit, so you can copy paste, you can select things and select specific layers. View gives you some control over different ways to view these setups. So zoom in, out, zoom to 100%, zoom to fit, all very important when you're taking a look at your site. And it also has a couple of features around how you want to show links, rulers, guides, things like that. The other tools are going to be a little more context sensitive, so layout, we don't have anything on our layout right now, no text to control yet, graphics aren't in place. Components we will be taking a look at, and you can always access the create component from the file menu up here and use create component. You can also open previews from here, and you can build out custom code, which we won't be going over because we didn't talk about how to code in this class. So yeah, pretty simple stuff to start with. When we take a look at the next buttons on the top left, we have the insert button. The insert button will give you access to all kinds of really great Framer utilities. So to start off, the sections section up here is going to give you specific design templates that you can just drag and drop directly into your page to get you started without having to fuss too much about your layout, without having to fuss too much about if you want something here or there, where do you want things to align. All of this stuff is pretty perfectly aligned, pretty much perfectly made when you drop it in. So if we were interested in taking a little bit of a shortcut with our starting page, we could totally drop in a header, and that would give us a nice framed header. And it also gives us the opportunity to see this line in the background, these series of lines. That's indicating that there's an image available space back here. We can double click this, and when we do, we can choose an image and drop it in. That would start our site pretty strong. If we wanted to, following that, we could go back to the sections and add another section below it, and we're halfway there. So with just a couple of things from these sections, you can really start to build out a site very quickly in a tool like this. And we can add things like navigation to the top, and we can add from the bottom here a footer. So this could be the way you start building your portfolio site. You could have all of these elements just automatically dropped in, and then you can tweak them to your liking. So jumping back into the section, I'm not going to go through every single element that we have available here, but just know that anytime you want to, you can drag and drop an element from the section into any portion of your page. What you should look for is when you're dragging something over, it'll give you a little blue highlight bar to show you exactly where you're dragging it to. That helps keep things really well organized. If you did need to move something, when you select a section, you'll always get access to a little grippy handle on the left-hand side. You can click and drag that and move it around to reorganize your things. Makes things very easy. So further on the insert panel over here, we have sections like collection lists. We're not going to be running through collection lists, but that is in the learning section on the Framer learning site. Same thing with content fields here. These are called CMS systems, content management systems, and it's just something we don't need for our portfolio site, but it's definitely something that a lot of web pages use. So if you have interest, I would definitely recommend you jump in and take a look. So for the elements section, this is where things get more useful for us. Under elements, you can see we have the option to insert lots of things. We have images, GIFs, videos, which would be videos that you have hosted yourself, not hosted somewhere like YouTube, because of course we have right next to it a YouTube link, Vimeo. We have animation styles, which includes Lottie. I'd really recommend, if you want to do some cool animation on the web, to dig a little deeper into Lottie. It's very, very easy compared to a lot of other animation pieces. We have access to audio imports down here. We can build forms quickly. We can use icon libraries. We can build interactive sections like slideshows and carousels. And we have a couple of design pattern options. So if we want to have a button, we want to insert a button very quickly, we can certainly do that just by dragging and dropping it in, and the button just lives on the page. We can then control things like the button's size over in the right. Then if we wanted to, we could control some of the parameters of this button by going over to the right-hand panel, which I'll show you a little bit more about later, but I digress. Back in the insert panel, you can always take a scroll through these patterns. You can take a look at the social feed sections and the utility sections. Some of these are honestly not going to be super useful for building something like a portfolio website, but I think that it's always worth taking a look at what kind of things you can do to save yourself a little bit of time. Next to the insert section, we have a layout section. Now, under the layout section, you can choose to create a frame using the F key as the hotkey is also a way you can create a frame. You can insert an image. You can choose rows, columns, or grid. I'm just going to give you a little demo of what it looks like when you pull in rows. So if I take rows and I click here, it will give me a little cursor to insert some rows. So I'm going to just select my section here and add a nice big section of rows. So now, any content I drop in here is going to live inside of each of these rows. Each of the rows, when you drop them in, similar to if I were to use the frame tool, they will have a color automatically applied to them. So this is just to make sure that you can see your frame you've just drawn from the background. If we select any one of these rows, you can see in the right-hand menu, which again we will go more in depth into, you can see that we have color selections here. So if we wanted to build a row and we wanted to add, say, some text, and we want to say, hey, this is my row 1, you can do that, and then you can have this centered inside of your row. You don't have to worry about it jumping out, and then you can change the background of your row color to white, or you can turn the transparency down to 0. And now you have something framed up nicely in your row, though it's not the nicest design, and you have just something organized and easy to use going forward. We'll talk more about the benefits of using rows and columns a little bit later. But before we jump to the next section, I do want to show you the advantages of columns as well. So we should be familiar with columns as we've used them before in some of our web design. So I'm going to drop in 2 columns here. When you first start working with columns and rows, it can be a little bit confusing as to exactly how you add more rows or columns. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So when you select one of your rows, as an example, you can hold down the Option button while you're clicking and dragging, and you'll duplicate that row. I would suggest you use their banding while you're doing your layout and duplicate them in the order of the color banding. You can see here we have the darker blue, light blue, darker blue, light blue, darker blue. That will just help you keep things separated a little bit. Once you've done that, you can go in and you can control the actual height of these just by clicking and dragging. It's very easy, but it's just one of those things that's not super intuitive. When you click here, you don't have the option to add more rows over on your right-hand panel or anything like that. Same thing with columns. You can hold and just click and drag, and you'll create a 3-column spread, 4-column spread, however many columns you want, and you can just build it out this way. Great way to organize your content either way. So another great tool you can use is the grid tool. We're just going to take a look at that now. So we'll click on grid and we'll just draw a little section of grids, and you'll see that nicely centers itself automatically when I clicked and dragged on it. And grid is a little easier to work with. Now over on the right-hand panel under layout, you'll see we have columns and rows listed here and gap. So we can add columns very easily, we can add rows very easily, and we can put whatever content we want in those sections as we build them out. Of course, we can resize it just by clicking and dragging, but this makes things a little bit quicker, a little bit easier when you're working in these sections where you want to have a nice equal layout. If I click on here and I click on my grid and I control this gap over here, you can see I control all spacing around my elements equally all at once. Very easy to work with, and it's very quick. One thing that's really a benefit here that we'll take a look at a little bit later is when you're building things into responsive designs. So when you're putting this into a mobile size, this will actually automatically reflow all of your elements. So all of these will fall in order in line. You won't have to worry about customizing or resizing any of this. Let's see if we can get this to work right now with an additional breakpoint for the phone. There you go. You can see how it's ordering the information over here. And if we don't like it, we can tactfully reorganize it a little bit. But the goal here is just to make sure that all of our content lives in the right space. You'll notice that when we take a look at our desktop version over here and we're reordering it on the phone, it doesn't reorder it on the desktop because Grid actually operates independently of because the viewport version that you're working with operates independently from the desktop version, from the tablet version. So if you reorganize these things here, it won't actually make a change on your desktop version, meaning you can organize your information on mobile very easily. So now that we've run through the grid tool, I'm going to just show you the text tool here. You can see it's a simple menu click up here at the top bar, or you can also press the T key and you'll get the text typing tool. There are two ways it works. One, you can click and drag the text tool and that will create a text frame. And then you can type "the brown hound jumped over the moon," and your text will just be in this text-sized framed up box, which means that you can manually control the height and width and everything of your text box. You can take your text and align it as you'd like to, so we can center align this, make it look a little bit tidier, though I don't think that anything's really going to save such a simple little text box. Now, if you take your text tool again and you just click, it will create a text typing field, which is a bit different because it doesn't give you control over the height in the same way. Let's take a look. So we have now "the brown hound jumped over the moon," and you'll see these text boxes look different. When I click this one, it's a nice big wide frame. And when I click this one, it's quite compact and small. And that's because what we've actually done here is created a different style of text layout. This one is an automatic, if you look over on your right hand side, auto fit width and height. And we click here, this one is not auto fit width and height. This is a fixed width and height. So when it's auto width and height, the bigger the size of the text box that your text exists in, the bigger your text will be. And when you have an automatic resizing happening, it can be a little tricky to wrangle in your type sizes. So I'd recommend you reserve this kind of thing more for, say, header text, things you want to have uniquely sized. If we're looking at a text box like this, obviously this can be perfectly framed inside of our box we've created. This can too. But when we add more text to this, this will just sort of reflow center. So I'm going to type another sentence here. "The cat jumped over the house and ate a mouse." So you'll see this stayed nice and centered in my page. This one, if I keep typing on here, you can see that it actually just reflows outside of the box. That's just it's very similar to the way that Adobe XD works with this stuff, and it can be a bit of a pain if you're not used to it, but always remember you can change any of these settings anytime you want from this section on the right over here, and I will show you a little bit more about changing those a little bit later. So now that we've run through all of the major components and how to add them into a Framer page, I want to show you something about how Framer organizes information. So on here, we see we have a nice grid. On our layers panel, you'll see that it's automatically nested many of the elements here. So we have a desktop, which is our primary all-encapsulating piece. Inside of the desktop, we have a grid, which has all of our grid items in here, and each one of these grid items is represented here as what's just called a frame, because really building your grid is just grouping together a number of frames. So if I have all of these frames in here and I go and I want to type in some text and I click in this frame box, let's create a nice text box here, you'll see over on the left hand side, I'm just going to type in text test text, which is not the easiest thing to say on camera, you'll see that now we have desktop, grid, frame, and inside of frame 1, I have a text box. So Framer has automatically grouped these elements together because it's smart enough to know what you're trying to do. If at any time you wanted to move these things around, you can move them into other frames, but the text will not move with it. So be mindful that this is always going to try to group your elements together in a relatively intelligent kind of way. So if you're ever losing something, just check your layers panel and make sure that everything looks like you expect it should. So now we're going to take a look at the right-hand panel, which in this example, we're only going to take a look at 2 ways that the right-hand panel can demonstrate information. This will cover most of the information that we would ever need to know about the right-hand panel. So on the frame selection, when you select, say, a frame, you will get a number of controls over on the right-hand side that look a bit different than if you selected, say, an image or if you selected text. It's context sensitive. So depending on what you have selected, the right-hand panel will change. It gives you access to all kinds of different things like overlays, links, position types, sizes, layout styles, effects, and styling, and scroll section styling, and things like this. The nice part of building a site in something like this is that you don't have to go very deep to get a lot of really great work done. If I'm looking at the way all of this is designed over here, I can see I'm clicked on this one frame. I'm going to change the color of this one frame to a nice light pink color. In my styles panel, I can adjust the opacity if I want to as well. I can choose to have it invisible or visible. Now keep in mind this does take it out of the flow of content. So by turning off visibility, we can actually make it disappear in this menu. And we can control the radius, which controls the edges of our frame. So the higher the radius, the more rounding that happens. You can see the rounding happening here. Reset that. We can rotate this in place, so it will take and rotate your object, which can add really cool effects to your page, actually. You can add borders by clicking on the border menu. And when we click this, we'll get a little pop-up that gives us a couple of options, and we'll run through a little bit more of this in just a minute. And then really, that's all we have to take a look at. So sizing is something you can control up here as well. You can control sizing with the columns, and you can choose how many rows you want something to take up. So for example, in a grid-based layout, if I have a single grid square and I want this to take up 2 columns, I can select 2 columns and it will span across 2 columns. I can also make this take up the equivalent of 3 rows worth of space, and you can do that for any one of your elements. So let's say I wanted my blue and my pink elements to take up more space. I can select each one and select 2 columns, and now I already have something of a more interesting layout started. Hopefully that all makes good sense. It's a very easy to use, very powerful little set of tools you have available here. And it's pretty simple. It should be familiar with some of the things we've worked with in Adobe XD on the right-hand bar there. If we're selecting text, we'll get similar things with position size, all of these style menus and things like this, including visibility, but we'll also get text controls. So over here, we have a little menu of text controls, including transforms, which will give you the ability to capitalize uppercase or lowercase things. We also have alignment tools, your line height, so we can change the line height here, letter spacing, so we can space letters out differently. And we have size tools here. So if I select this text itself and I choose the letter size span and I control the size of the text, I can make it much bigger. I can center that text on the page. And of course, I can do things like change fonts, change weights of my fonts. All of the fonts available here, and there are lots of them, they're all sourced from online web resources that allow reusing of all of these typefaces, so you don't have to worry about licensing or anything like that. These are all free to use. I would suggest you find a typeface you like in here and try to minimize the number of typefaces you use when you're building your site. Similarly, we can do things like we can select this text frame and do a little bit of rotation to it. But when you're working with text, something I want you to pay attention to is that if I say select this text, I can't actually rotate the text inside the box because I need to select the frame the text is inside of. When I'm selecting the frame, I can certainly rotate it. But when I'm selecting the text itself, I can't. Similar things apply to controlling your text parameters. So if I select the text box, sometimes I can't control certain things like text distance between letters and things like that. Just be careful you know what you're selecting before you start moving things around. So now you can see I've deleted everything on my page. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we would send this out and have the site hosted when we're ready to share it. So here's the way you would do this. You would just go up to your menu over here and you would click the publish button. It's really that easy. If you want to preview your site, you can click the play button here and it will give you a preview of your site in the frame you have it. You can then actively resize your site on the sides here by grabbing these handles, see what it looks like on mobile, see what it looks like on desktop. It's a really great way to preview your site. If your site is longer, you'll be able to scroll. See, you get a little scroll bar here. You can click the X at the top of the screen to close that. You can also control in here under the gear icon a number of the settings of your site. So you can include like a page social image for when people share it. You can put a little description in here. You can title it and customize little bits of your URL if you have a paid plan. There are a couple of things down here like custom code that you can't do unless you have a plan you're paying for. So that about wraps up the overview of working with some of the functions on Framer. Hopefully that was helpful, and if you have any questions or concerns or don't know how to do something, feel free to reach out. This is just the first of a couple of videos that we'll be uploading, running through the features and functions. So this one was really just about getting you started. In the next video, we're going to be talking a lot more about building an actual functional page, how to build things like a navigation bar, add imagery, add videos, things like that. So stay tuned and see you in the next video.